When my daughter's fiancé called me garbage at the altar during their rehearsal dinner, the entire room fell silent. Marcus stood there in his designer suit, sneering down at me while my daughter Claire looked away in shame. I smiled quietly, clutching the leather folder I'd brought with me. Tomorrow at their wedding, everyone would learn exactly who the real garbage was, and Marcus's carefully constructed façade would crumble in front of 200 guests. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The relationship between Claire and me had always been complicated, though I'd spent 28 years trying to understand why. As a single mother who'd worked 2 jobs to put her through private school, I'd sacrificed everything for my daughter's future. My ex-husband Richard had left when Claire was only 3, disappearing to start a new family in Oregon, leaving me with mountains of debt and a toddler who cried for her daddy every night. I'd built my life around Claire's needs. Working as a nurse during the day and cleaning office buildings at night, I'd somehow managed to afford the tuition at Westbrook Academy, the prestigious private school where the children of doctors and lawyers receive their education. Claire had thrived there academically, but something else had taken root during those formative years. A deep shame about our modest background, about our small rental house in the working-class neighborhood of Riverside, about the second-hand clothes I carefully altered to look presentable. By the time Claire graduated from college with her business degree, funded largely by scholarships I'd spent countless hours helping her apply for, the distance between us had grown into a chasm I couldn't bridge. She changed her last name from Martinez to Martin, claiming it was more professional. She'd stopped inviting me to company events, saying they were boring networking functions I wouldn't enjoy. When she moved into her sleek downtown apartment, she'd asked me not to visit without calling first, explaining that her neighbors were very particular about security. Then Marcus entered the picture 2 years ago. Marcus Wellington III, as he insisted on being called, came from old money. His family owned a chain of luxury hotels across the Northeast, and Marcus himself worked in some vague executive position that seemed to involve more golf than actual labor. He was handsome in that polished country club way, with perfectly styled dark hair, a perpetual tan, and teeth too white to be natural. He drove a Mercedes, wore watches that cost more than I made in 6 months, and spoke with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never been denied anything in his entire life. Claire was utterly besotted. Within 3 months of meeting Marcus at some charity gala her company had sponsored, she was wearing his grandmother's engagement ring and planning a wedding that would rival a royal affair. The budget was astronomical, funded entirely by the Wellington family, who apparently believed that anything less than extravagant was beneath their standards. From the beginning, Marcus treated me with barely concealed contempt. At our first meeting, he'd looked me up and down in my Target dress and nursing clogs, having come straight from a 12-hour shift at County General, and asked Claire in a stage whisper if I'd had time to change. When I explained I'd come directly from work to meet them, he'd simply raised an eyebrow and changed the subject. Over the months that followed, the slights accumulated like paper cuts. He'd consistently mispronounce my name, calling me Verona instead of Ramona, despite my corrections. He'd make jokes about people who worked in service industries, glancing at me to see if I'd react. At family dinners with the Wellingtons, I'd be seated at the far end of the table, practically in a different room from the main conversation. Marcus's mother, Patricia Wellington, a woman whose face had been lifted so many times she seemed perpetually surprised, would ask me intrusive questions about my finances and living situation, then share meaningful looks with her husband. Claire never defended me. Not once. Instead, she'd laugh along with Marcus's jokes, agree with Patricia's thinly veiled criticisms, and later tell me I was being too sensitive. She'd remind me that the Wellingtons were sophisticated people, that I needed to develop thicker skin, that this was her chance at the life she'd always deserved. The life she deserved. As if the life I'd provided, built with my own hands through sheer determination and sacrifice, had been some kind of punishment she'd endured. 3 months before the wedding, Claire informed me that Marcus's family would be handling all the planning. My input wouldn't be necessary. When I offered to contribute financially, suggesting I could perhaps pay for the flowers or the rehearsal dinner, Claire had actually laughed. She told me the flower budget alone was $40,000, and the rehearsal dinner at the Wellingtons Country Club would cost nearly twice that. My life savings wouldn't cover the linens. The humiliation of that moment had burned, but I'd swallowed it like I'd swallowed so many other hurts. Because at the end of the day, Claire was my daughter, and I loved her despite everything. I'd convinced myself that once the wedding stress was over, once she and Marcus were settled, maybe we could rebuild our relationship. Maybe she'd remember who had been there when it really mattered. 2 weeks before the wedding, I received an engraved invitation to the rehearsal dinner. It arrived in the mail rather than being hand-delivered like the other family members had received. Theirs and my name was misspelled. Ramona Martinez had become Romana Martinez. A small thing perhaps, but it felt like another deliberate erasure of my identity. The rehearsal dinner was held at the Rolling Hills Country Club, a sprawling estate of manicured lawns and old money pretension. I'd bought a new dress for the occasion, spending more than I should have on a simple navy sheath that the saleswoman assured me was appropriate for such an event. I'd had my hair professionally styled for the first time in years, and I'd even splurged on a pedicure, though no one would see my feet in the closed-toe heels I'd chosen. I arrived exactly on time, only to find that the cocktail hour had apparently started 30 minutes earlier than my invitation indicated. The terrace was already filled with guests holding champagne flutes, and making the kind of small talk that the wealthy seem to excel at. I recognized Marcus's parents holding court near the bar, along with his sister Penelope and her investment banker husband. Claire was there too, radiant in a cream-colored designer dress, laughing at something Marcus was saying. No one noticed my arrival. I stood near the entrance for several minutes, clutching my small purse and trying to decide whether to approach the group or find a quiet corner to wait until dinner was called. The decision was made for me when Patricia Wellington's voice cut through the ambient conversation. "Oh, you made it," she said, her tone suggesting she'd hoped otherwise. "We thought perhaps you'd gotten lost. These clubs can be so confusing if you're not familiar with them." The implication was clear. People like me didn't belong in places like this. I forced a smile and accepted the glass of champagne a passing waiter offered, though I rarely drank. I needed something to do with my hands. The cocktail hour dragged on interminably. I made awkward small talk with Marcus's relatives, who asked polite questions and forgot my answers immediately. I watched Claire from across the terrace, willing her to catch my eye and acknowledge my presence, but she was too absorbed in her role as the beautiful bride-to-be, accepting compliments and showing off her ring to anyone who hadn't yet admired it. Finally, dinner was announced. We moved into the club's grand dining room, where round tables draped in ivory linens were arranged around a head table. Place cards directed guests to their seats, and I wasn't surprised to find mine at a table in the back corner, far from the family tables near the front. I was seated with Marcus's elderly great-aunt who appeared to be mostly deaf, the club's event coordinator who kept checking her phone, and several people I didn't recognize who turned out to be business associates of Marcus's father. The meal itself was exquisite, course after course of food I couldn't identify, each plate arranged like a work of art. I ate mechanically, contributing little to the stilted conversation around me, watching Claire at the head table. She looked happy, genuinely happy, in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child. Marcus had his arm draped across the back of her chair, and occasionally he'd lean over to whisper something that made her laugh. Maybe I'd been wrong about him, I thought. Maybe his coldness toward me was just nervousness about joining a new family. Maybe once they were married, once the pressure of the wedding was over, he'd soften. Maybe I could learn to coexist with this man who made my daughter so happy, even if he'd never warmed to me. Then came the toasts and everything changed. Marcus's father went first, delivering a polished speech about legacy and tradition, about how proud he was to welcome Claire into the Wellington family. Patricia followed with remarks about what a perfect daughter-in-law Claire would make, how she embodied all the grace and sophistication the Wellington women were known for. Penelope, Marcus's sister, gave a touching toast about gaining a sister and a friend. Then Marcus stood, and the room fell expectantly silent. He cut a striking figure in his tailored navy suit, the kind of man who commanded attention simply by standing. He raised his champagne glass and began speaking in that confident, practiced way of his, the tone he probably used in boardrooms and business dinners. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began. "As we gather to celebrate the beginning of Claire's and my life together, I'm reminded of how fortunate we both are. Claire has brought so much joy into my life, and I'm honored that she's chosen to become a Wellington." He paused for the polite applause, smiling at Claire, who beamed up at him adoringly. "Claire and I share so many values," he continued. "We both believe in excellence, in maintaining certain standards, in surrounding ourselves with quality in all aspects of life. It's one of the things that drew me to her immediately. She understands what it means to be part of something greater than yourself, to uphold a legacy of success and refinement." Something in his tone made my stomach clench. There was an edge there, a sharpness beneath the smooth delivery. "Of course, we all come from different backgrounds," Marcus went on, his eyes scanning the room. "Some of us are fortunate enough to be born into families with long histories of achievement and culture. Others have to work harder to reach that level of sophistication. It's the American dream, isn't it? The ability to transcend your origins and become something better than what you started as."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
A few uncomfortable shifts rippled through the crowd. People were starting to sense where this was going. "Claire has done exactly that," Marcus said, his smile widening. "She's worked incredibly hard to distance herself from her humble beginnings. And I respect that enormously. It takes real strength to recognize when your background is holding you back, and to make the difficult choices necessary to move forward." My hands were shaking now. I set down my champagne glass before I could drop it. "Which brings me to a somewhat delicate topic," Marcus continued, his tone becoming almost jovial, as if he were about to share a funny anecdote. "Tomorrow at our wedding, we're going to be surrounded by the best of society. Senators, CEOs, people who matter in this world. And Claire and I have worked very hard to curate the perfect guest list, to create an event that reflects who we are as a couple." He paused, taking a sip of his champagne. The room had gone completely quiet. Even the servers had stopped moving. "Now, Claire's father won't be attending tomorrow. He has his reasons, and frankly, it's probably for the best. But her mother will be there because Claire, despite all her efforts to move forward, still feels some misguided obligation to include her." My blood turned to ice. He wasn't going to say what I thought he was going to say. Not here. Not in front of everyone. "I want to make something very clear," Marcus said, his voice hardening. "Tomorrow at our wedding there will be photographers, videographers, journalists from the society pages. The Wellington name carries weight, and this wedding will be documented and discussed for years to come." He finally looked directly at me, his expression cold and calculating. "So I'm asking you, Ramona, as politely as I can, to be mindful of your place tomorrow. Stay in the background. Don't insert yourself into family photos. Don't try to draw attention to yourself or your situation. Because frankly, having someone like you front and center in our wedding materials would be embarrassing for everyone involved." The silence that followed was deafening. Someone dropped a fork, and it clattered against a plate like a gunshot. "You're an embarrassment to Claire," Marcus continued, warming to his theme now, emboldened by the shocked silence of the room. "Always have been. The cleaning lady mother with her knockoff purses and her cheap perfume. Do you know how many times Claire has had to explain you away to our friends? How many times she's pretended you don't exist because acknowledging you would diminish her in their eyes?" I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning, but I couldn't look away from Marcus's face, from the cruel satisfaction there. "So here's what's going to happen tomorrow," he said, his voice dropping to something almost conversational. "You're going to sit in the back. You're going to keep quiet during the ceremony. You're going to skip the family photos. And during the reception, you're going to leave early and save everyone the discomfort of having to acknowledge the garbage that Claire dragged in with her from her previous life." Garbage. He called me garbage. The word hung in the air like poison. I looked at Claire, silently begging her to say something, to defend me, to tell Marcus he'd gone too far. But my daughter wouldn't meet my eyes. She was staring at her plate, her face flushed, her jaw tight. But she said nothing. Patricia Wellington looked positively delighted, a small smile playing at her lifted lips. Marcus's father was nodding approvingly, as if his son had just made a particularly good business decision. Around the room, guests were studiously examining their dessert plates, pretending they hadn't just witnessed this public humiliation. I felt something shift inside me then. Something that had been bending under the weight of years of disrespect and dismissal finally snapped. I reached down and picked up the leather folder I'd brought with me, the one I'd been carrying since I arrived. I'd brought it to give to Claire after dinner, thinking it would be a nice surprise. A sentimental gift before her wedding day. Now it would serve a different purpose entirely. I stood slowly, and every eye in the room turned to me. My hands were steady now, the shaking replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. I walked toward the head table, my heels clicking against the marble floor, the only sound in the utterly silent room. "Marcus," I said, my voice calm and clear. "Thank you for that honest assessment of how you view me. It's good to know exactly where we stand." He looked surprised that I was speaking, as if he'd expected me to simply absorb the blow and slink away. "Since we're being so honest tonight," I continued, "I thought I should share some honesty of my own. Some truths that I think everyone here should know before tomorrow's wedding." I placed the leather folder on the table in front of Claire. She looked up at me then, her eyes wide with confusion and what might have been the first stirring of fear. "You see, I'm not just a cleaning lady, though there's nothing shameful about that work. I'm also a nurse at County General Hospital, where I've worked for 26 years. And as a nurse, I have access to certain records. Medical records, specifically." Marcus's confident smile faltered slightly. "3 months ago, a young man came into our emergency room," I said, opening the folder to reveal a stack of documents. "He'd been in a car accident. Minor injuries, but we ran standard blood work as protocol. And something interesting came back in his test results." I pulled out the first document, a laboratory report with Marcus's name clearly visible at the top. "Marcus Wellington III tested positive for several sexually transmitted infections," I said clearly, letting the words settle over the room like fallout. "Infections he'd contracted approximately 6 months before his accident. Which means he had them when he proposed to my daughter. When he was sleeping with her while telling her he loved her and wanted to spend his life with her." Claire's face had gone white. Marcus was standing now, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Now, normally medical records are confidential," I continued, but Marcus signed a release form allowing me to discuss his care with family members. He listed Claire as his fiancé and emergency contact. So technically, I'm not violating any laws by sharing this information with his future wife and her family. Patricia Wellington had dropped her champagne glass. It shattered against the floor, but no one moved to clean it up. "But wait, there's more," I said, pulling out another document. "Because I got curious after seeing Marcus's test results, so I did some digging. Called in a few favors with colleagues at other hospitals. And I discovered something fascinating." I held up a series of photographs, printed on glossy paper. They showed Marcus with various women, entering and leaving hotels, sitting in intimate restaurants, embracing in parking lots. All time-stamped within the past year. All while he'd been engaged to Claire. "Marcus has been maintaining relationships with at least 3 other women during his engagement to my daughter," I said. "One of them is a cocktail waitress at the Wellington Hotel downtown. Another is a graduate student at the university. The third is actually the wife of one of his business partners." I looked directly at Marcus's father, whose face had turned an alarming shade of red. "That would be your wife, wouldn't it, Gerald?" I said to the investment banker sitting next to Penelope. "The woman Marcus meets every Thursday afternoon at the Riverside Suites while you're in the office?" Gerald stood so fast his chair tipped over backward. "These are lies." Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out strangled. "You bitter, vindictive woman. You're making this up because you can't stand that Claire is moving up in the world, leaving you behind." "Am I?" I pulled out my phone and pressed play on a video file. Marcus's voice filled the room, recorded in crystal clarity. The video showed him in a hotel room with a woman who definitely wasn't Claire, saying things that made even Patricia Wellington gasp. "I hired a private investigator 4 weeks ago," I explained calmly, after Claire mentioned some concerning symptoms she'd been having. Symptoms that sounded suspiciously like the infections Marcus was treated for. I wanted to be sure before I said anything. But now I am sure. I turned to my daughter, who was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. "Claire, you need to go to a doctor on Monday," I said gently. "Get tested for everything. Because Marcus has given you more than just an engagement ring." The room erupted. Gerald launched himself at Marcus, who barely managed to dodge the first punch. Patricia was shrieking at her son, demanding to know if any of this was true. Penelope was crying. Marcus's father was on his phone, probably calling lawyers. Guests were gathering their belongings and rushing for the exits, eager to escape before things got worse. And Claire just sat there, staring at the documents spread across the table, her perfect wedding fantasy crumbling around her. I picked up my purse and walked toward the exit, leaving the folder and all its damning evidence on the table. As I reached the door, I turned back one last time. "For what it's worth, Marcus," I called across the chaos. "The garbage is taking itself out. I won't be at the wedding tomorrow. I won't subject myself to any more of your family's abuse. But I want you to know something." I smiled then, a real smile, the first genuine one I'd felt all evening. "Every single person in this room now knows exactly what kind of man you really are. And by tomorrow morning so will everyone else, because I've already sent copies of all this evidence to every name on your wedding guest list. The senators, the CEOs, all those people who matter so much to you. They're all waking up to emails containing everything I just showed you, along with a few additional details I didn't have time to share tonight." Marcus's face had gone from red to gray. "You wanted to protect the Wellington name, to maintain your precious standards and legacy," I said. "So I'm helping you out. I'm making sure everyone knows exactly what the Wellington standards really are. Cheating, lying, disease-spreading garbage wrapped up in designer suits and old money arrogance." I turned to Claire one last time. "I love you, sweetheart. I always have. Everything I did, every sacrifice I made was for you. But I won't stand here and let anyone treat me as less than human, not even for your sake. When you're ready to remember who was actually there for you all those years, who actually loved you unconditionally, you know where to find me." And with that, I walked out of the Rolling Hills Country Club with my head held high, leaving behind the wreckage of what was supposed to be a perfect Wellington wedding celebration. The drive home felt surreal, like I was floating above my body watching someone else navigate the familiar streets. My hands were steady on the wheel, my breathing calm and even, but inside I was trembling with the aftershocks of adrenaline and vindication, and something that felt dangerously close to satisfaction. I'd spent weeks gathering that evidence, ever since the day Claire had casually mentioned some unusual symptoms during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. She'd brushed it off as stress from wedding planning, but something in my nurse's brain had flagged the description. Combined with my growing suspicions about Marcus's frequent business trips and late nights, I decided to investigate. The private investigator had been expensive, eating up a significant chunk of my modest savings. But what he'd uncovered had been worth every penny, not just for the evidence itself but for the validation. All those years of being made to feel inadequate, of being told I was too sensitive or misunderstanding Marcus's humor, of watching my daughter grow ashamed of me while this man was the actual problem all along. My phone started ringing before I'd even made it home. I glanced at the screen. "Claire." I let it go to voicemail. She called again immediately. Voicemail. Then came the text messages, dozens of them, the notifications pinging one after another like machine gun fire. "Mom, please pick up. Mom, I need to talk to you. How could you do this? You've ruined everything. Everyone is leaving. The wedding is cancelled. Marcus's family is threatening to sue you. You're a horrible person. I hate you. Please call me back. Mom, please." I turned off my phone and pulled into my driveway. The small house looked exactly as I'd left it that morning. Neat flower beds that I tended on weekends, the porch light I'd installed myself after watching YouTube tutorials, the welcome mat I'd bought at a discount store. My humble, embarrassing garbage life. Inside, I changed out of my expensive dress and into comfortable pajamas. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my small kitchen table, the same one where Claire had done her homework throughout elementary school, where we'd shared countless meals and conversations before she decided I wasn't sophisticated enough to be part of her new world. The knock came around 11. I'd been expecting it, though I'd thought it might take longer. Claire stood on my doorstep, still in her cream dress, her makeup smeared from crying, her hair falling from its elegant updo. She looked young suddenly, vulnerable in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be in years. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice small. I stepped aside wordlessly and let her enter. She walked into the living room and stood in the center of the worn carpet, looking around as if seeing the space for the first time. "The wedding is off," she said finally. "Obviously. The club canceled our contract. Most of the vendors are backing out. Marcus's family is in crisis mode, trying to contain the scandal. His father is furious. His mother won't stop crying. And Marcus himself has locked himself in his apartment and won't answer calls." She turned to look at me, and I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Not the polished, sophisticated woman she'd tried to become, but my daughter. Scared and hurt and lost. "Did you know?" she asked. "About all of it? The cheating, the infections, all of it? And you waited until tonight to tell me?" "I found out 4 weeks ago," I admitted. "When the investigation results came back. I wanted to tell you immediately, but I also wanted to be absolutely certain before I made accusations that would destroy your wedding. So you chose the rehearsal dinner," she said bitterly. "In front of everyone. You couldn't have pulled me aside privately? Called me? Given me the information and let me decide what to do with it? Would you have believed me?" I asked quietly. "If I'd come to you privately with this evidence, would you have taken my word over Marcus's?" The silence that followed was answer enough. We both knew she wouldn't have. She would have accused me of trying to sabotage her happiness, of being jealous of her success, of making up lies because I couldn't handle her moving on to a better life. "He called you garbage," I said softly. "In front of 200 people, he called me garbage and told me to stay in the background of your wedding because I was an embarrassment. And you sat there and said nothing, Claire. You let him humiliate me, insult everything I'd sacrificed for you, reduce me to something shameful that needed to be hidden away." Tears started streaming down her face again. "If I'd come to you quietly with this information," I continued, "you would have dismissed it, found ways to explain it away, convinced yourself I was lying or mistaken. The only way you were going to actually see Marcus for what he is was if I forced you to see it publicly, in a way you couldn't deny or rationalize. You destroyed my life," she whispered. "No," I said firmly. "Marcus destroyed your life. I just prevented you from legally binding yourself to a man who would have continued destroying it for decades to come. You're 28 years old, Claire. You can rebuild. You can start over. But if you'd married Marcus tomorrow, if you'd tied yourself to him and his family, you would have been trapped." She sank onto my worn couch, the same one we'd picked out together from a thrift store when she was in high school. She'd been embarrassed by it even then, always making excuses why friends couldn't come over. "I tested positive," she said suddenly, her voice breaking. "I went to an urgent care on the way here. Used one of those quick test clinics. Marcus gave me chlamydia. Maybe other things too. They said I need to do more comprehensive testing on Monday." The clinical part of my brain noted this information professionally, already making mental lists of treatments and follow-up care. But the mother part of me wanted to wrap her in my arms and promise that everything would be okay. "It's treatable," I said instead. "All of it is treatable. Especially since we caught it relatively early." "How long?" she asked. "How long have you known something was wrong?" I sat down beside her on the couch, maintaining a careful distance. "I started suspecting Marcus wasn't faithful about 6 months ago," I admitted. Little things didn't add up. The way he'd changed plans suddenly, the expensive gifts that seemed like guilt offerings, the times I'd call you and you'd mention he was supposed to be in meetings but I'd see his car parked somewhere unexpected. "You were following him?" "I work at County General," I reminded her. "I see things. I notice when cars that shouldn't be in certain neighborhoods are parked near certain hotels. And yes, maybe I paid attention when I saw Marcus's very distinctive Mercedes in places he had no legitimate reason to be." She was quiet for a long moment processing this. "But the medical records," she said finally. "How did you get access to those? That must be illegal somehow." "Marcus came into our 3 months ago after a car accident," I explained. "Minor collision, nothing serious. But we do standard blood work on accident victims. His tests came back positive for multiple STIs. And when we informed him of the results, he specifically requested that his fiancé be listed on his medical release form so she could be notified. He gave us your name and contact information. So you had legal access." "I had legal access," I confirmed. Though I'll admit, I probably should have told you immediately instead of waiting. But I wanted more evidence. I wanted to be absolutely sure before I potentially ruined your wedding over suspicions that might have been wrong. Claire laughed bitterly. So you hired a private investigator. His name is Robert Chen. Former police detective. Very thorough. Very discreet. And what he found was worse than I'd imagined. The 3 other women. The pattern of lies. The visits to hotels charged to his corporate credit card, while he told you he was in business meetings. I'm so stupid, Claire whispered. You're not stupid, I said firmly. You're young and you wanted to believe in the fairy tale. Marcus is handsome and charming and wealthy. He represented everything you thought you wanted. That doesn't make you stupid. It makes you human. She turned to look at me then, really look at me, and I saw her face crumple. I've been horrible to you, she said. For years. I've been ashamed of you, embarrassed by you, constantly trying to distance myself from you. And the whole time, you were the only person who actually loved me enough to protect me. I didn't disagree with her assessment. There was no point in pretending it hadn't hurt, that the years of dismissal and shame hadn't carved deep wounds. Why didn't you ever say anything? She asked. Why did you just accept the way Marcus and his family treated you? The way I treated you? Because you're my daughter, I said simply. Because I loved you more than I hated how you were treating me. Because I hoped that eventually you'd grow up enough to realize what you were doing. And because I knew that if I pushed too hard, if I demanded you choose between Marcus and me, you'd choose him. So I waited. I would have chosen him, Claire admitted quietly. If you'd made me pick a year ago, even 6 months ago, I would have chosen Marcus and his world over you. God, what does that say about me? I didn't answer. Sometimes the hardest truths needed to sit in silence, to be fully absorbed before they could be addressed. His mother called me 17 times tonight, Claire continued, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. Finally left a voicemail saying that the Wellington family would be pursuing legal action against you for defamation and violation of medical privacy laws. She said their attorneys would ensure you lost your nursing license and possibly face criminal charges. Let them try, I said calmly. Everything I revealed tonight was either legally obtained through Marcus's own signed medical release forms or documented by a licensed private investigator. Patricia Wellington can threaten all she wants, but she knows as well as I do that the last thing her family needs right now is more public attention on Marcus's behavior. Claire pulled her knees up to her chest, making herself small on my couch the way she used to do as a little girl when she was scared or upset. The guests are talking. By tomorrow morning, everyone in our social circle will know. The society page editor already called me 3 times asking for a statement. Someone recorded part of your speech on their phone, and it's apparently circulating online. Good, I said, surprising both of us with the firmness in my voice. Let everyone know. Let every woman who might have been Marcus's next target know exactly what kind of man he is. Let his business associates know. Let his country club friends know. Actions have consequences, and Marcus has spent his entire life insulated from any real accountability. You sound almost happy about it, Claire observed, a note of accusation in her tone. I'm not happy, I corrected. I'm relieved. Relieved that you didn't marry him. Relieved that his true character is finally exposed. Relieved that I don't have to pretend anymore that everything is fine when it clearly isn't. She was quiet for a moment, picking at a loose thread on her dress. The cream fabric was wrinkled now, stained with tears and champagne from the chaos at the country club. I need to cancel everything, she said finally. The church, the caterer, the photographer. The invitations went out weeks ago. I need to contact everyone and tell them the wedding is off. Oh God, the gifts. People have already sent gifts. I need to return everything. One thing at a time, I said, slipping automatically into the practical problem-solving mode that had gotten us through countless crises over the years. Make a list. Prioritize. The venue and vendors first, then the guests, then everything else. I can't go back to my apartment, Claire said suddenly. Marcus has a key. I gave him a key 6 months ago and I never got it back. I don't want to see him. I can't face him right now. You can stay here, I offered, though part of me wondered if she'd accept. This house, with its modest furniture and small rooms, was everything she'd been running from for years. She looked around the living room again, taking in the family photos on the walls, the bookshelf filled with paperbacks and nursing textbooks, the Afghan my mother had crocheted draped over the back of the couch. I saw her expression shift, something like recognition or maybe regret passing across her features. "This was always home, wasn't it?" she said softly. "This house. No matter how much I tried to pretend otherwise. No matter how ashamed I was of it." "Yes," I said simply. "It was always home." She started crying again. Harder this time, years of suppressed guilt and shame and loss pouring out in racking sobs. I moved closer and pulled her into my arms the way I used to when she was small, when a scraped knee or a mean comment from a classmate had seemed like the end of the world. She clung to me, her face pressed against my shoulder, and cried like she hadn't cried since she was a child. "I'm sorry," she gasped between sobs. "I'm so sorry, Mom. For everything. For being ashamed of you. For letting Marcus treat you that way. For changing my name and pretending I came from somewhere different. For making you feel like you weren't good enough when you were always more than enough." I stroked her hair, feeling the elaborate styling come loose under my fingers. "I know, baby. I know. How can you even stand to be near me after how I've treated you?" "Because you're my daughter," I said again. "Because love doesn't stop just because someone hurts you. It bends, it strains, sometimes it breaks for a while. But if the foundation is strong enough, it can be rebuilt." We sat like that for a long time, Claire crying and me holding her, the years of distance slowly beginning to close. Eventually her sobs quieted to occasional hiccups, then to slow, steady breathing. She pulled back, her face blotchy and swollen, her expensive makeup completely destroyed. "I look terrible," she said, catching sight of her reflection in the darkened television screen. "You look real," I corrected. "That's better than terrible." She almost smiled at that. "I forgot how you always know the right thing to say." "Not always. But I've had a lot of practice at dealing with difficult situations." Claire stood up slowly, stretching as if her body ached. "Can I really stay here tonight? I know it's asking a lot after everything." "Of course you can stay. Your old room is exactly as you left it." She winced at that. "I haven't been in that room since I moved out 6 years ago. I kept making excuses about why I couldn't visit, why you should come to my apartment instead." "I noticed," I said neutrally. We climbed the stairs together, and I opened the door to Claire's childhood bedroom. I'd kept it preserved like a time capsule, partly out of sentiment and partly out of hope that someday she might want to reconnect with the girl she used to be. Her high school trophies still lined the shelf above her desk. Her college acceptance letters were still pinned to the bulletin board. The poster of her favorite band, embarrassingly outdated now, still hung on the wall. "It's like a museum," Claire said, stepping inside hesitantly. "Like you've been waiting for me to come back." "I have been," I admitted. "Not to this exact room necessarily, but to me. To us. To the relationship we used to have before you decided it was something to be ashamed of." She sat on the edge of the twin bed, running her hand over the faded quilt. "I used to dream about leaving this house, about moving somewhere glamorous and exciting, somewhere that matched who I wanted to be. And then when I finally did leave, when I built this whole new life for myself, I realized I'd left behind the only person who'd ever really known me." "You can always come back," I said. "Not to this room, not to being a child again, but to being yourself. To remembering where you came from, and who helped you get where you are." "Where I am right now is pretty pathetic," she said bitterly. 28 years old, cancelled wedding, no fiancé, possibly with multiple STIs, and sleeping in my childhood bedroom at my mother's house. Or, I offered a different perspective. 28 years old, dodged a bullet before making a catastrophic life decision, still young enough to rebuild, and safe with someone who loves you unconditionally. She considered this, then nodded slowly. "I like your version better." "Get some rest," I said, moving toward the door. "Tomorrow will be difficult, and you'll need your strength for all the calls and cancellations." "Mom," she called as I reached the hallway. "Yes. Thank you. For loving me even when I didn't deserve it. For protecting me even when I was horrible to you. For being brave enough to do what needed to be done, even though you knew I'd hate you for it at first." "You're welcome," I said simply. "That's what mothers do." I closed her door gently and walked to my own room, feeling simultaneously exhausted and energized. The confrontation at the country club had taken everything out of me, but it had also freed something that had been compressed for years. I'd finally stood up for myself, finally. Refused to accept the role of shameful burden that Marcus and his family had tried to force me into. My phone, which I'd turned back on, showed 73 missed calls and over 100 text messages. I scrolled through them quickly, noting the senders. Several were from Patricia Wellington, alternating between threats and demands. A few were from other nurses at the hospital, having somehow already heard about the drama and wanting to know if I was okay. One was from my supervisor, asking me to call her first thing Monday morning, which probably meant the Wellingtons had already started making trouble about my job. But there were also messages of support from my colleagues who'd met Claire over the years and never understood her coldness toward me. From neighbors who'd watched me struggle to raise a daughter alone while working multiple jobs. From old friends who'd slowly been phased out of my life as I devoted more and more time to supporting Claire's ambitions. One message stood out from the others. It was from Robert Chun, the private investigator I'd hired. Saw the news already spreading online. Just wanted you to know I have additional documentation if you need it for any legal proceedings. Also wanted to say well done. That took guts. Not many people have the courage to do what you did tonight. I smiled at that, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. He was right. It had taken courage. More courage than I'd known I possessed. For years I'd taken the path of least resistance, accepting poor treatment because I didn't want to rock the boat, didn't want to risk losing my daughter completely. Tonight I'd chosen self-respect over peace, and the relief was immense. I changed into my nightgown and climbed into bed, but sleep was elusive. My mind kept replaying the events of the evening, analyzing each moment, each choice, each reaction. Marcus's face when I'd started revealing his secrets. Patricia Wellington's shock and outrage. The other guests scrambling to distance themselves from the scandal. And most importantly, Claire's expression as her perfect future had disintegrated before her eyes. Had I done the right thing? The question nagged at me despite my earlier certainty. I could have handled it differently. Could have told Claire privately, given her the evidence and let her decide how to proceed. Could have avoided the public spectacle and the humiliation that came with it. But even as I second-guessed myself, I knew the truth. Claire wouldn't have believed me if I'd come to her privately. She was too invested in Marcus, too committed to the life he represented. She would have found ways to explain away the evidence, to rationalize his behavior, to convince herself I was lying or mistaken or jealous. The only way to save her was to make the truth so undeniable, so public, that she had no choice but to see it. Sometimes love meant making the hard choices, even when those choices would cause pain in the short term. Sometimes protecting someone meant forcing them to face realities they desperately wanted to avoid. I must have eventually drifted off, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through my bedroom window, and I could smell coffee brewing downstairs. I checked my phone and saw it was almost 9 in the morning. I'd slept later than I had in months. When I came downstairs, I found Claire in the kitchen, still wearing her wrinkled dress from the night before, standing at the stove making eggs. The coffee pot was full, and she'd set out 2 mugs with my favorite creamer already on the counter. I forgot you were an early riser, I said, pouring myself coffee. I haven't been able to sleep past 7 since college, she said, focusing intently on the eggs as if they required her complete attention. Marcus always complained about it. Said I woke him up being too loud in the mornings. These walls are thin, I observed. I would have heard you if you'd been loud. You were being considerate. She plated the eggs and brought them to the small kitchen table where we'd shared so many meals over the years. We ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both of us needing the normalcy of ordinary breakfast after the chaos of the previous night. I started making calls at 7, Claire finally said. The church was surprisingly understanding. Apparently this isn't the first wedding they've had canceled last minute, due to groom misconduct. The caterer was less sympathetic but agreed to partial refund. The photographer actually already knew what happened. Said someone had forwarded her the video from last night, and she'd already assumed the wedding was off. How did you feel about that? I asked. Knowing that people are watching video of what happened? Claire was quiet for a moment, pushing eggs around her plate. Honestly? Relieved. because it means I don't have to explain over and over what happened. Everyone already knows Marcus is a cheating liar. I don't have to defend my decision to call off the wedding or convince people. I'm not overreacting. That's a mature way to look at it. I'm trying to find silver linings, she said with a weak smile. Otherwise, I'll just spend all day crying and feeling sorry for myself. Some crying and self-pity is allowed, I reminded her. You just had your entire future upended. You're allowed to grieve for what you thought you were going to have. Even if what I thought I was going to have was built on lies? Especially then. The loss of the dream is real, even if the dream itself wasn't. We finished breakfast and Claire insisted on doing the dishes, waving away my offers to help. I watched her move around my kitchen, noting how she still knew where everything was kept despite years of absence. Some things muscle memory didn't forget. What happens now? I asked when she'd finished. With your apartment, your job, your life in the city? Claire dried her hands on a dish towel and turned to face me. I need to go to my apartment today and get my things. I'm thinking about breaking my lease and moving out. I can't live there anymore, not with all those memories of Marcus. Every corner of that place reminds me of our life together, of the future we planned. You could always stay here, I offered, while you figure things out. I know it's not what you're used to, but the offer stands. She looked around the kitchen, her expression thoughtful. Would you really want me here? After everything? After years of me treating you like you were something to be hidden and ashamed of? Yes, I said without hesitation. I would really want you here. This house has felt too empty since you left. And maybe it would be good for both of us. A chance to rebuild what we lost. I have a condition though, Claire said, straightening her shoulders in that way she did when she was about to say something difficult. If I stay here, if we do this, I need to start over. Really start over. I need to stop pretending to be someone I'm not. Stop trying to fit into a world where I'll never truly belong. What does that mean practically? It means I'm changing my name back to Martinez, she said firmly. It means I'm leaving my job at the marketing firm. I only took that position because it was full of people like Marcus and his family, people I thought I needed to impress. It means I'm stopping the Botox appointments and the designer shopping, and all the other expensive nonsense I've been doing to try to look like I belong in their world. I felt pride swell in my chest, but I kept my expression neutral. Those are big changes. Are you sure you're ready for them? I'm sure, Claire said. Last night when Marcus called you garbage, when he said those horrible things about you in front of everyone, I had this moment of clarity. I saw myself through his eyes and I realized he saw me the same way. As garbage that had been polished up and presented as something better than it was. As an embarrassment he was willing to tolerate because I'd learned to play the part convincingly enough. She sat back down at the table, her hands wrapped around her cooling coffee mug. I've spent years trying to erase where I came from, trying to pretend I was born into privilege and sophistication, instead of earning everything through hard work and sacrifice. And in the process, I erased the person who made all of that possible. I erased you. You didn't erase me, I said gently. You distanced yourself from me. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like I tried to erase every trace of my real history. The scholarship kid from Riverside with the single mother, who worked herself to exhaustion. The girl who wore thrift store clothes and brought homemade lunch to school, while everyone else bought from the cafeteria. I rewrote my entire story to make myself more palatable to people like Marcus. And now I want my real story back, Claire said firmly. The true one. The one where my mother is a hero who sacrificed everything to give me opportunities. The one where I come from humble beginnings and worked my way up through actual effort, not by pretending I was born into wealth. The one where my last name means something because of the woman who gave it to me, not because I changed it to sound more Anglo. I reached across the table and took her hand. That's a beautiful goal, sweetheart. But it's not going to be easy. Your friends, your social circle, they're all part of that world you're talking about leaving behind. They're not really my friends, Claire said. I realized that last night too. Real friends would have been horrified by how Marcus treated you. Real friends would have said something, done something. Instead, they all just sat there in uncomfortable silence, and then half of them sent me messages afterward asking if the wedding was still on, and if they should return their gifts. What did you tell them? I haven't responded yet. I'm trying to figure out what to say. How do you tell people that your entire life was a lie, and you're starting over from scratch? You don't owe them explanations, I said. You can simply say the wedding is canceled and leave it at that. Marcus is telling people that you fabricated everything, Claire said. His mother sent me a long email this morning claiming that you're mentally unstable, that you made up the medical records and hired actors to pose as his mistresses. She said the Wellington family attorneys are preparing a massive lawsuit against you. Let them, I said calmly. Every piece of evidence I presented last night is documented and verifiable. Marcus signed those medical release forms himself. The private investigator has time-stamped photos and videos. If the Wellingtons want to take this to court, they're welcome to try. But it will only mean more public exposure of Marcus's behavior. You're not worried at all? I'm a little worried about my job, I admitted. But I'm not worried about the truth. The truth is on my side. Claire's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the screen and her face paled. It's Marcus. He's been calling all morning. I've been ignoring him. Do you want to talk to him? She stared at the phone for a long moment, then decisively pressed the decline button. No. I have nothing to say to him. And anything he has to say to me can go through attorneys once I figure out what I'm doing legally. Legally? The engagement ring, Claire explained, twisting the massive diamond on her finger. It's a family heirloom. Worth over $100,000 according to Patricia. I'm sure they'll want it back, but I'm not sure if I'm legally obligated to return it since Marcus was the one who broke the relationship with his infidelity. That's probably a question for a lawyer. I agreed. I don't have a lawyer. I don't even know how to find one. Marcus's family always handled any legal issues that came up. I know someone, I said. Teresa Gonzalez. She handles family law cases. I met her at the hospital a few years ago, when one of her clients came in after a domestic violence incident. She gave me her card and told me to call if I ever needed anything. You kept her card for years? I keep a lot of things, I said. You never know when they might be useful. I retrieved Teresa's card from my address book and handed it to Claire. She studied it for a moment, then nodded decisively. I'll call her Monday. Get advice about the ring, about breaking my apartment lease, about whether the Wellingtons actually have grounds for a lawsuit. Good plan, I said. For now, let's focus on getting through today. Do you want help going to your apartment to get your things? Claire looked relieved. Would you come with me? I know it's a lot to ask, but I don't want to face it alone. And I definitely don't want to risk running into Marcus. Of course I'll come. Let me change into something more appropriate than pajamas. An hour later, we pulled up in front of Claire's apartment building in the upscale downtown district. It was the kind of place I'd visited only a handful of times, always feeling out of place among the doormen and marble lobbies and residents who looked like they'd stepped out of fashion magazines. Marcus doesn't have access to the building without me, Claire explained as we rode the elevator to the 14th floor. But he does have a key to my unit. I'm worried he might have come by already. Her worry proved justified when we opened the apartment door. The place had been ransacked. Not violently but thoroughly. Drawers pulled open, contents scattered, closets emptied onto the floor. It looked like someone had been searching for something specific. What was he looking for? I wondered aloud. Claire walked through the apartment, surveying the damage with a surprisingly calm expression. Evidence, probably. Anything I might have that connects him to his affairs or proves he knew about the infections before he exposed me to them. Did you have anything like that? I had his laptop, she said, walking to her bedroom. He left it here sometimes when he traveled. And he never changed his password, which was stupid of him. I never looked at it before, never had reason to. But I bet there were emails, messages, things he doesn't want coming to light. She stopped in the doorway of her bedroom, and I heard her sharp intake of breath. When I joined her, I saw why. The bed had been stripped, the mattress slashed open in several places. Feathers from the pillows covered the floor like snow. He was really desperate, Claire said quietly. I've never seen him lose control like this. We should call the police, I said. This is breaking and entering, destruction of property. And tell them what? That my ex-fiancé used the key I gave him to enter the apartment I asked him to stay away from? They'll say it's a civil matter. She had a point, unfortunately. The messy boundaries of intimate relationships often fell through the cracks of legal protection. Did you find what you were looking for, Marcus? Claire called out suddenly, her voice rising. Because whatever it is, whatever you're so desperate to hide, I already gave copies to my mother. And she has them stored somewhere safe. I raised an eyebrow at her. We hadn't discussed any such arrangement, but I understood the strategy. Let Marcus think we had more evidence than we'd already revealed. Keep him worried about what else might come to light. Let's pack what we can salvage and get out of here, I suggested. This place doesn't feel safe anymore. We spent the next 2 hours sorting through the chaos, rescuing Claire's clothes and personal belongings from the destruction. Much of it was ruined, expensive designer pieces torn or stained beyond repair. But Claire showed surprisingly little emotion about the losses. They're just things, she said, folding a surprisingly intact sweater into a suitcase. Things I bought to impress people who never really cared about me anyway. I'm almost relieved to be free of them. As we worked, Claire told me stories I'd never heard before. About times Marcus had been cruel when no one else was watching. About how he'd belittle her intelligence, her taste, her background, always in private where no one could witness his true character. About how he'd isolate her from old friends, claiming they weren't sophisticated enough for their new social circle. About how he'd made her feel like she should be grateful that someone of his status would even consider marrying someone like her. Why didn't you tell me any of this? I asked, carefully packing family photos that had somehow survived the ransacking. Because it would have proven you right, Claire admitted. From the beginning, you had reservations about Marcus. Nothing overt, nothing you said directly. But I could see it in your face whenever we were all together. The way you'd watch him like you were trying to figure out who he really was beneath the charm. I didn't trust him, I confirmed. But I didn't say anything because I didn't think you'd listen. I wouldn't have. I was too committed to the fantasy of what life with Marcus represented. Wealth, status, acceptance into a world I'd always felt locked out of. I would have dismissed anything you said as jealousy or small-mindedness. We loaded the last of the salvageable items into my car, making multiple trips from the 14th floor to the parking garage. As we drove away from the building, Claire took one last look back. I lived there for 3 years, she said. Thought I'd build a whole life there. And now I'm leaving with everything I actually care about fitting in 4 suitcases and some boxes. That's not a bad thing, I observed. It means you know what matters and what doesn't. Back at my house, we carried everything up to Claire's old room. It took some creative arrangement to fit her belongings into the small space, so different from the expansive walk-in closet she'd had at her apartment. I forgot how tiny this room is, Claire said, looking around at the cramped quarters. We could clean out the guest room, I offered. Give you more space. No, she said firmly. I want to stay here in this room. I think I need to remember what it was like before I had everything. Before I thought having everything was what mattered. That evening we ordered pizza and sat on the couch watching old movies, something we hadn't done since Claire was in high school. It felt both familiar and strange, like slipping into an old coat that didn't quite fit the same way anymore, but still provided comfort. I have my first appointment with the doctor on Monday, Claire said during a commercial break. For comprehensive STI testing. I'm terrified of what they might find. Most infections are treatable, I reminded her in my nurse voice. Even the ones that aren't curable are manageable with modern medicine. You caught this early, which is in your favor. How do I tell future partners about this? She asked. How do I explain that my ex-fiancé gave me diseases because he was cheating on me? Honestly, I said. You tell them honestly. And anyone worth being with will understand that you were a victim of someone else's betrayal, not a willing participant in risky behavior. She nodded but didn't look convinced. I feel damaged. Like Marcus broke something in me that can't be fixed. He hurt you, I corrected. But hurt isn't the same as broken. You're still whole, Claire. You're still you. Just with some new scars that will eventually heal. My phone rang then, interrupting our conversation. I glanced at the screen and saw it was my supervisor from the hospital, calling on a Saturday evening, which was never a good sign. I need to take this, I said, stepping into the kitchen for privacy. Ramona, it's Linda. I'm sorry to bother you on the weekend, But we need to talk about what happened last night at the country club. My stomach clenched. What about it? The Wellington family has filed a formal complaint with the hospital, claiming you violated patient privacy laws by revealing Marcus Wellington's medical information in a public setting. They're demanding your immediate termination and threatening to sue both you and the hospital if we don't comply. I took a deep breath, steadying myself against the counter. Linda, Marcus signed a medical release form specifically authorizing me to discuss his health information with his fiancé. I have the documentation. Can you send it to me first thing Monday morning? The hospital's legal team needs to review everything before the Wellingtons escalate this further. I'll bring the original documents with me, I promised. Everything I did was by the book. After ending the call, I returned to the living room where Claire was watching me with worried eyes. That was about Marcus's complaint, wasn't it? They're trying to get me fired, I said. But I covered my bases. The release forms will prove I acted within legal boundaries. Claire's expression hardened. They're going after your career now. This is my fault. If I'd never gotten involved with Marcus, none of this would be happening. If you'd never gotten involved with Marcus, you'd have married him and spent years trapped in a toxic marriage, I countered. I'd rather deal with legal threats than watch you suffer that fate. Sunday passed quietly. We spent the day organizing Claire's things, making lists of what still needed to be handled, and gradually settling into a new normal. By evening, the house felt less like a temporary refuge and more like home again. Monday morning arrived with a mix of anxiety and determination. I dressed carefully in my most professional outfit and gathered all the documentation I'd need to defend myself. Claire had her doctor's appointment, and we agreed to meet back at the house that evening to discuss how everything had gone. The meeting with Linda and the hospital's legal team lasted 2 hours. They reviewed every document, every signed form, every piece of evidence. Finally, the head attorney looked up from the papers spread across the conference table. Mrs. Martinez, everything here is completely legitimate. Marcus Wellington signed these release forms of his own volition. You had legal authority to discuss his medical information with his designated contacts. The Wellingtons don't have a case. Relief flooded through me. So my job is safe? Your job is safe, Linda confirmed. In fact, we're prepared to support you fully if the Wellingtons continue pursuing legal action. You did nothing wrong. That evening, Claire and I sat at the kitchen table comparing our days. Her test results would take a few days, but the doctor had been optimistic about treatment options. My job was secure despite the Wellington family's threats. We survived, Claire said, raising her water glass in a mock toast. We did better than survive, I corrected. We fought back. Over the following weeks, the scandal gradually faded from immediate gossip to occasional whispered conversation. Marcus apparently left the state, taking a position with a hotel chain in California to escape the rumors. His family's reputation took a hit, but old money has a way of weathering storms that would sink others. Claire found a new job with a non-profit organization, work that felt meaningful rather than prestigious. She changed her name back to Martinez officially, and I saw her confidence grow as she stopped pretending to be someone she wasn't. One evening 3 months later, we were making dinner together when Claire said something that made me stop chopping vegetables. I'm glad it happened. All of it. The humiliation, the canceled wedding, everything. Because it brought me back to you. It brought me back to myself. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw the girl I'd raised reflected in the woman she was becoming. Not the polished, anxious version who'd spent years trying to fit into Marcus's world, but the authentic person who knew her own worth. You were always enough, Claire. You just needed to remember that. I know that now, she said, smiling. Thanks to the woman who loved me enough to let me be called garbage, so I could see who was really treating me that way. We hugged then, tight and long, healing years of distance in that single embrace. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but we'd walk it together, mother and daughter, remembering where we came from and building toward something better. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.